I'm Joyce Cohen. I have been a Peterborough player since 1977. Off and on over the years, I've been in many plays. The last set of plays I was in was Arsenic and Old Lace, playing one of the crazy sisters with the wonderful Dale Hodges. And then I did The Producers and The Doctor's Dilemma by George Bernard Shaw. So I was thinking about how this all started for me, how I got to come to the Players. I had been in New York City for about a year and a half. I'd arrived in a show that was a big hit, which was wonderful, and I got an agent, and I started doing television commercials. And they were going pretty well, but I really wanted to do theater. So the summer stock companies were beginning to hold auditions, and I asked my agents to submit me, and they didn't want to do that because they didn't want me to go out of town. I was making money for them in town, and they didn't want me to go. And I did not have my equity card, my union card. If I had had that, I could then show up at what's called an open call, kind of like a cattle call that all the theater companies have to do. And so you would go to that and bring your picture and resume and probably do a monologue or have a meeting. The casting person or director would decide if you seemed right for the shows, and then you would get an audition. So I wanted to do that very much, but of course I didn't have that card. I had my Screen Actors Guild card. And at that time, if you were a member of one of the professional unions, you were able to buy your initiation into another professional union. But that was $500, and I didn't have it. I don't know how this happened. I was having a conversation with an old friend of mine. We were talking, and I was telling him about my dilemma, and he loaned me the money. And I reminded him of this just recently, and he had no memory of it. But he said, well, that period of time, I'd just been hired to be a professor at a college, and I was feeling flush, I think, and so he loaned me the money, which I, of course, paid back to him. And he didn't remember it, but it was huge for me, just huge, that I was now a member of the Actors Equity Association. So I showed up for many open calls that spring for the summer theaters, and one of them was the Peterborough Players. And Charles Morey who had been at the theater for a long time. This was his first season as artistic director. And I sat down with him, and he said, oh, I know you. And I said, I don't know you. Well, I walked out of that interview and thought, well, that was brilliant, Joyce. You'll never get a call. Well, not only did I get a call, I got the part in my first season at Peterborough in 1977. And not only that, but 5 years later, I married Charles Morey. And now I'm sitting in our house in Peterborough. We also have a home in New York City for work and all, but anyway, that's another story. So that's my history, brief history. But let's do here the chapter. And, you know, get a cup of tea, have a drink. You don't need to look at me while I'm reading this, so if you want to take a walk, but it's a great chapter because this chapter is called A Theater for Our Town. On the stage, it is always now. The words are rising to their lips in immediate spontaneity. The theater is supremely fitted to say, behold, these things are. Thornton Wilder. The plays produced in 1936 were Kind Lady, Noah, Squaring the Circle, One Sunday Afternoon, He Who Gets Slapped, and Cradle Song. The 1936 season saw the producing director's torch passed from Alfred Kremberg to the great Russian actress-director Maria Ouspenskaya. The arrival of Madame Ouspenskaya marked the end of the formative years of the Peterborough Players, moving from experimental verse plays performed in front of a coterie of invited friends and acquaintances to more traditional Broadway hits and stock classics that would appeal to a more diverse audience. While we don't know exactly when the decision was made, we do have evidence of why it happened. In an interview with Douglas Gilbert of the New York World Telegram just before the opening of the 1940 season, EBS is quoted as saying, "It, the theater, was successful when I opened it in 1933, but I could see my mistake. I gave over to a poetic dramatist, and we did his things. The people that came from Dublin and other nearby resorts didn't mind it, but the natives walked out." next to the clipping in the scrapbook at the Peterborough Historical Society in which this quote was found, there is a handwritten note by EBS. Quote, "This is not a verbatim a literatum interview. I did not say these things the way they are quoted here." Unquote. And yet there is reason to believe that this is a plausible explanation of what occurred. In a different later interview, EBS recalled that a local woman came up to her after a performance of one of Cranberg's poetic dramas and said that she didn't understand a word of it, but still felt that something beautiful had happened there that evening. Apparently, EBS got the message. Maria Ouspenskaya came to the Players in 1936 by way of New York City. She was born July 29, 1876, in Tula, Russia, the daughter of a lawyer. She trained in acting as a performer in stock theater in the Russian provinces and later joined the famed Moscow Art Theater, where she studied under Stanislavski, the creator of method acting. When the Moscow Art Theater toured the U.S. in 1922, she stayed on in New York and became a renowned Broadway actress. There she founded the New York City School of Dramatic Art in 1929. Whether Ouspenskaya was contacted directly by EBS or perhaps through one of her many artistic friends in the Peterborough area or in New York, it is a testament to EBS's powers of persuasion and her ebullient personality that she was able to lure an artist of Ouspenskaya's stature from the bright lights of New York City into a New Hampshire barn to practice her craft. Along with a new acting technique and artistic direction, Ouspenskaya also brought along several associates from her school to the Players, including Fred and Mary Harris, Richard Gaines, and a stage designer, Serge Strankowski. Gaines was producing director, Fred Harris was artistic director, and Mary Harris was director of the apprentice program during the 1936 and 1937 seasons. With her assistants assigned to their new jobs for the season, Ouspenskaya took the overall leadership role as supervisor of productions, with EBS, of course, looking overall as managing director. According to a New York gossip columnist, in addition to her contingent of protégés, the Russian dowager also brought to New Hampshire a personal menagerie: 7 dogs, 3 cats, and 4 rabbits. Although never physically menacing, Johnny Stearns found her somewhat dictatorial and intimidating, as surely did many of her students in New York, who included Joan Crawford, John Garfield, and Katharine Hepburn, among many other stars. During her time at the Players, Ouspenskaya updated and revised the entire apprentice program to include instruction in method acting as well as seminars in playwriting and directing. She was able to bring in some talented instructors. It was Ouspenskaya's emphasis on more mainstream plays that was her enduring legacy to the Players. For example, the first show of the 1936 season was Kind Lady, a long-running Broadway melodrama that had also been produced as a movie. The transcript reviewer took note of the change, writing, quote, "The Players have obviously made a distinct departure from the special type of drama with which they identified themselves. The immediate success of their opening night has been, in itself, a proof that their decision to extend their scope somewhat was judicious." In 1937, the plays produced were The Guardsman, Candida, Hotel Universe, She Stoops to Conquer, The Kingdom of God. It's interesting that George Bernard Shaw, who wrote the play Candida, would become the Players' most frequently produced playwright. The other significant change for the Players in 1936 was entering into a contract with the Actors' Equity Association. This made the Players more widely recognized as a legitimate and accredited professional theater. EBS had originally signed a theatrical talent contract with the Petite Theater Guild in 1934 and later with the Council of Resident Stock Theaters, thus making the Players a professional theater as early as 1934. Chuck Morey remembers Sally Stearns Brown telling him that the first union contract for the Players mandated a minimum salary of $5 a week, plus room and board. I know I didn't get paid very much money when I worked at the Players that first year, and as I remember, I actually had to pay for room and board. that changed early on in my time. But the first year I had to pay for my room and board. By 1938, her blossoming Hollywood career demanded more of her time, and with EBS's blessing, Madame Ouspenskaya put the theater's supervision into the capable hands of Fred and Mary Harris. After leaving the Players and moving to Southern California, she received a Best Supporting Actress Oscar nomination in 1936 for the movie Dodsworth, and again in 1939 for Love Affair. However, her biggest movie role, and the one that would make her famous, was in the 1941 horror classic, The Wolfman. The opening of the 1938 season saw Fred Harris as the new producing director, having taken over the role after the departure of Richard Gaines. While Fred and Mary would be with the Players as directors only 2 brief seasons, they were both highly regarded for their work with the Actors Company and Apprenticeship School during their 5-year career at the theater. Fred later became chair of the drama department at the University of California in Berkeley, from where he continued to send young people to the Players, including Richard Matthews and Sue Miley and Robert Alvin. While not at the theater, Sally Stearns was enrolled in the Yale School of Drama in 1938, and she went on to become the first woman to earn a Master of Fine Arts degree in lighting design from Yale. Much of the work that was required preparing for the opening of the theater each spring took place in EBS's New York hotel flat. Her apartment and the hotel dining room became the southern offices of the Peterborough Players every winter. EBS returned to New York from holiday and leisure travels by mid-February and was soon firmly ensconced at a large table surrounded by stacks of books and manuscripts detailing prospective plays. In between reading plays and taking notes, EBS would field an incessant flurry of questions and inquiries about the Players, mostly by telephone and mail, some by wire, and many from visitors and personal contacts who dropped by the hotel to discuss theater business. By late April, EBS was busy every day, from early morning to late in the evening, contacting actors and technicians, interviewing apprentices, and finalizing all the details of the upcoming season. She retired to the hotel dining room each evening at the end of the workday, where the nightly salon was held at dinner hour, much like around the dining room table at Stearns Farm. One of the changes made as part of their preparations was in the format of the season. Prior to 1938, the shows had been staged every other week. For the 1938 season, plays would run Wednesday through Saturday, over a 2-week run, spanning a total of 9 weeks for the season, including apprentice shows. Additionally, the admission price was reduced from $1.10 to 75 cents, no doubt as a result of the lingering economic malaise. More welcome news was a greatly expanded apprentice program with more than 20 individuals anticipated to be in-house. By the time the 1939 season arrived, EBS was devoting 11 months a year to the Players, which by that time had evolved into a well-established and respected summer theater. She was covering each year's deficits out of contributions from friends and family or from those generous patrons in the community willing to contribute. She was not only managing director of a thriving professional summer stock theater and drama workshop, she was also responsible for a staff and company that had now ballooned to as many as 50 individuals each season. This made her nervous about the safety of the old farm's equipments and buildings. Johnny Stearns recounted how he used to traipse around with EBS at the beginning of the season to inspect various parts of the farm, taking note of potential safety hazards. She once found an old well with a makeshift wooden cover, Johnny said, and stood up on it, stomping periodically to test its condition. "I don't think this is safe," she said, and then promptly disappeared. She escaped the well with nothing worse than a cracked rib, but the story got around, and a townsperson later took Johnny aside and joked, "So, you've only been open a week, and I hear your mother's already in the hole." Richard Noyes, a senior in high school, made his first appearance at the Players during the summer of 1939 as assistant technical director under Tyke Lounsbury. Dick was a local boy, like Tyke, and also like him had a strong passion to learn stagecraft. Following his graduation from high school, Dick sold one of the family cows for money to purchase a suit and a ticket to New York, where he would audition for a role in Life with Father. The cow was apparently not worth as much as Dick and his family had expected, and he came up short on funds for the trip. So the Players' company and staff responded by passing the hat to make up the difference, with EBS contributing the last $5. Making it to New York, he got the breakthrough part of his young career and spent the next 2 years touring nationwide with the show. In June of 1939, the opening night of the first show of the season was deemed a benefit performance for the Peterborough Hospital Aid Society. EBS began a tradition of giving back to the community that would continue to the present day. Despite the noted progress in artistic development, in updating the summer program of shows to appeal to a wider audience, in nurturing the careers of apprentices and aspiring actors, the benefit performances, and even an improved access road, the theater remained a partially rehabilitated open-air barn on a century-old farm. Bats, moths, and mosquitoes frequently made appearances during performances. In fact, I remember doing a production of Arms in the Man, and I kept hearing screeching. It turns out there were 2 bats flying above us, mating during the entire scene. Hard to fight with that. Audience members sat on folding chairs and were required to endure the sometimes stifling heat of hot, humid summer evenings as best they could. Not all of this was unwelcome, as much of the theater's charm was derived from this rural, unimproved venue, and of course, from the wonderful space of the barn itself. While many challenges lay ahead for the theater, EBS and the Players were about to become involved with a playwright and a play that would bond them forever with the community of Peterborough, as well as become their signature dramatic work. It would ultimately help define the theater and the town's identity and its celebrity for decades to come. The playwright was Thornton Wilder. The play was Our Town. I've had the great good fortune in my career to play Emily Webb twice and Mrs. Webb twice. In fact, I guess I'm ready to be a cast member in the graveyard now. But my first experience doing Emily Webb was here at the Players in the 1983 production. And I remember the actress playing my mother, Mrs. Webb, who was Susan Merson, a wonderful actress and still a great friend to this day. And she said to me, "Oh, playing this role will change your life." She said, "It changed mine. It changes anybody's life who plays it." And she was absolutely right. I mean, the play is so profound, of course, looking at ordinary life, but taking the measure of it moment by moment, and so really appreciating all of life. And Emily's speech in the 3rd act about, well, why can't we see while it's happening everything clearly and specifically? And of course, she says it much more eloquently. Wilder gives the words to say it much more eloquently. That did change my life and affect my thinking about trying to stay present in every moment. Thornton Wilder's breakthrough novel was The Bridge of St. Louis Rey in 1927, which earned him his first Pulitzer Prize. While living in Chicago, Wilder became close friends with fellow lecturer Gertrude Stein and her companion Alice B. Toklas. In fact, Stein's novel, The Making of Americans, written in 1925, is said to have been one of the inspirations for Our Town. Our Town debuted on January 22nd, 1938 at the McCarter Theater in Princeton, New Jersey, and opened on Broadway on February 4th. The play unveils universal meaning in the ordinary lives of people who live in the fictional town of Grover's Corners, New Hampshire. Despite its initially lukewarm reception from critics, Our Town would go on to become a huge success on Broadway and earn Wilder his 2nd Pulitzer, making him the only American author to win Pulitzer Prizes for both fiction and drama. There is no definitive evidence that Wilder based the town of Grover's Corners on Peterborough, and although Peterborough is mentioned in the play as being one of the outlying towns near Grover's Corners, so are Jaffrey and other real towns in the area. The location of Grover's Corners, as stated by the stage manager, latitude 42 degrees, 40 minutes north, longitude 70 degrees, 37 minutes west, is in reality an insignificant spot of water in the Atlantic Ocean, some 100 miles off the coast of Massachusetts. Wilder did his best to have Grover's Corners remain a truly imaginary locale. However, there are compelling circumstances that point to Peterborough as at least the main source of inspiration. Wilder was periodically in residence at the MacDowell colony, where much of the play was written, beginning around 1930. He took long walks around the streets of Peterborough during his stays at the colony, conversing with the townspeople, visiting with local merchants, policemen on night duty, and whomever else he might have found interesting, and generally learning something more about the community than just a casual interest would justify. The foreman of the colony for over 30 years recalled, he, Wilder, saw it all himself. He took a new road every day and must have covered every mile of road in town. Once I met him in North Peterborough, walking as he usually does, with his head down and thinking all the time. He does not make any notes that one sees, but keeps it all in his head. After our town made its successful run on Broadway, there was much friendly debate among locals about which town in the Monadnock region was the model for Grover's Corners, and which residents may have been portrayed under pseudonyms in the play. There exists such an undisputable consensus that Grover's Corners is, at the very least, based loosely on Peterborough. In Wilder's biographies, in literary histories, some of those consider Grover's Corners a thinly disguised Peterborough at best. And among those associated with the players and residents of the Peterborough area, it is accepted as fact by almost all who have an interest in the subject. Perhaps one small point should be considered relevant. We know that EBS corresponded with Wilder about our town in 1938. In the company scrapbooks, there is a letter from Wilder to her dated November 12th, apparently in reply to a query about Johnny having a chance to audition for the play. Dear Mrs. Stearns, your letter came too late to give John a chance to read. The boy's part is cast. Reinhardt was chosen the stage manager and rehearsals start Thursday. Sometime during 1939 or the spring of 1940, perhaps through correspondence, or when EBS was wintering in New York City, EBS persuaded Wilder to sanction a performance of our town at the Players for the upcoming season. As Johnny Stearns recalled, EBS sold Wilder with her promise to him of an opportunity to see it just as he had envisioned it while writing the play, without the compromises of Broadway. Notwithstanding EBS's charm and persuasive character, perhaps there was also a more subtle, sentimental reason for Wilder to consent to this somewhat unorthodox idea. After all, there were many summer stock theaters, many of them with longer and more prestigious pedigrees where he could have chosen to have the play produced. Was it an indirect expression of gratitude to the MacDowell colony and the town of Peterborough for the satisfying and productive time spent there? Or could it have been an unspoken affirmation that his play should be performed in the very place whose townspeople and character provided inspiration for his work? Possibly both, or neither. However, an analysis of events through the perspective of distancing years lends credibility to the conclusion that there was quite likely more to Wilder's decision to have Our Town produced at the Peterborough Players during the summer of 1940 than simply the personal vanity and professional satisfaction of seeing his play performed without the compromises of Broadway. Wilder was, by all accounts, above such pettiness. Looking back, it is still amazing to believe that this highly acclaimed figure of American literature and drama took the time to involve himself with an unassuming upstart summer stock theater in the wilds of New Hampshire, permitting his Pulitzer Prize-winning play to make its post-Broadway debut there, no less. Then again, given the intimate connection between this small, quintessentially New England town and Wilder's dramatic masterpiece, it seems no surprise at all. There was much anticipation among the citizens of Peterborough after it was announced that Our Town was to be the highlight of the Players' 1940 season, and no little apprehension. Quote, some of the townspeople were a little nervous about it, Johnny Stearns recalled. They weren't sure that Wilder might not be poking fun at them and their small-town ways, unquote. But EBS set the tone and eliminated many of the doubts by casting some prominent local citizens in the play. The production drew nationwide attention in the dramatic community and elsewhere, as the notion of our town being performed in the real-life Grover's Corners caught the imagination of editors, critics, and writers alike. The Boston Herald ran a 2-page spread interviewing local Peterborough residents and Wilder himself. In the article, Wilder expresses his satisfaction that the third act graveyard scene would be done for the first time as he had intended. Not lugubrious, but with the dead engaged in ordinary affairs, knitting, reading, and chatting with one another. Wilder said this with assurance, as he had visited the rehearsals in Peterborough and personally arranged the cemetery scene chairs, as well as lending authorial advice on the interpretation of that and other aspects of the play. According to one transcript article, Wilder remarked to director Bertrand Mitchell, quote, "You may be the first director to have the honor of getting that third act right," unquote. Peterborough selectman Carrie Walbridge, when asked about the debate over which town is depicted in the play, replied, quote, "I no longer have any doubts about it. This is Grover's Corners, all right, and I am just beginning to appreciate the town in which I have lived all my life. I am beginning to think it is a pretty nice place to live." Opening night on July 31st was a sellout, with standing room being reserved by phone. In the audience were the Peterborough selectmen, the town clerk, and members of the fire department. The show was a huge hit in Peterborough, so much so that many people urged EBS to do it every year. Wisely, she declined the suggestions. The play, however, has been performed more often in 1940, 1960, 1976, 1983, 1993, 2000, and 2008 with James Whitmore, more than any other in the player's history. And it remains an audience favorite to this day. Maybe seeing themselves in the mirror of this play and liking what they saw made the folks of Peterborough truly embrace and accept the players as their own, and allowed them to reflect with unspoken pride and satisfaction on the special place in which they lived.